All right, so the government wasn't just focused on housing. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his government are also taking aim at grocery giants here in Canada. The Prime Minister is calling on the leadership of the largest grocery chains to create plans by Thanksgiving on how to stabilize food prices.
Their plan doesn't provide real relief for the middle class and people working hard to join it, then we will take further action, and we are not ruling anything out, including tax measures.
Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne is spearheading those discussions, and he joins me now from London. Minister, thanks for coming back this week. We appreciate the time.
Thank you very much, David. A big day for Canadians.
Well, you heard there the Prime Minister talking about big consequences for grocery giants that fail to provide relief to Canadians that could include tax measures. What kind of tax measures are we talking about here? Tax on profits, windfall taxes? What's the plan?
Listen, I would say, David, there'll be consequences. You know, the point that we've been saying is that kind of enough is enough. We need to have, meaningful action that would reduce price inflation in Canada in the grocery sector. I mean, we've heard from Canadians that one of the biggest, if not the biggest concern is obviously cost of living and the price of food. And we've seen record profits. We've seen doubling, I would say, of the profit margins in the grocery sector. And we need to, the reason why I told them, I said, come to Ottawa, we'll be in solution mode. We'll be looking at things that we can do together. We've seen that some international practices. I've looked at what's going on in France, for example, in other jurisdictions. The point is that what we need is meaningful action that would tackle price inflation, which has been skyrocketing in Canada, that we need to tackle together.
Okay, I understand what you're trying to get the grocery companies to do, but what is it you're threatening, I guess, for lack of a better word, to do if they don't follow suit? Like, what are the tax measures the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and the caucus are talking about in that announcement today? Can you be specific?
I would say there'll be consequences, David. I don't want to go there first because you know what I'm saying to CEOs of the grocery chain, it's not about us. It's about millions of their customers which want to see meaningful action. So they need to respond to them because they're saying, we want meaningful action to reduce price inflation in the grocery sector. So I'll be sitting with them. My point, and the Prime Minister was pretty clear, if they don't want to come to the table with meaningful solution, there'll be consequences. But I think we don't need to get there because I believe and I have all faith that they'll come to the table with solution because they're not just talking to me and the Prime Minister and Cabinet and caucus. They're talking to millions of customers which are watching tonight and also want to see meaningful action. So I think that we'll be together next week.
Right.
We'll tackle that together like we've done in other sectors with the telcos, and I'm sure we can find solutions that will help Canadians.
Okay, I was asking for specifics because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked specifically about this last year, about taxing the profits of grocery giants, and this is what he said to our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton. Just have a listen to this.
What about grocery stores, though, that continue to make a profit at a time when, for a lot of Canadians, that doesn't seem right?
The last thing we want to do is put on a tax that people then just pass along to the consumers. So we have to be careful about what we're doing. We're studying. I know there's been a lot of studies on what's happening with food prices, and we're looking at trying to help people. That's what we've tried to do every step of the way. But I don't think that the simplistic solution, as satisfying as it might sound, is necessarily the right approach.
So, Minister, help me understand it there. The Prime Minister worried a year ago that if you tax the grocery stores, they're just going to pass it on to consumers, and calling calls for a windfall tax to deal with high prices as simplistic. What's changed between then and now?
Well, I think the situation, you're saying, the price inflation of food, it has been skyrocketing. I mean, it's way above normal inflation you see in the country. So it requires us to take decisive action. What the Prime Minister said today, and in line with what he said at the time, what we're saying to them, there'll be consequences if they don't want to come with meaningful solution. But you know what, David, I have faith that they will come to the table with solutions because, like I said, you don't necessarily need to go to the consequences. They'll have to justify that to millions of customers across Canada who now understand that, we're going to be fighting for them because that's our role. My role is to fight for public interest and Canadians. That's what I'm doing. That's what the Prime Minister is doing. We said, come to the table. We'll look at solution. We understand that the Canadian market has its own dynamic, but at the end of the day, we need to see meaningful action that would reduce price inflation in Canada in the food sector.
Right.
And I think Canadians expect that. And they'll have to answer to me, the Prime Minister, but I would say millions of their customers which are watching tonight.
Right, but millions of customers have been watching this for well over a year. You know, when the Prime Minister was asked about that, the food prices have been high for a long period of time. And you're making a similar argument as when we spoke about the wireless issues in Toronto earlier this week, but food isn't like a discretionary, fungible expense for people. So, like, what's changed other than sort of the state of the country and political polling to get you to this point?
Oh, I would say it's always a good time to fight for Canadians and to fight for lower prices. It's always a good time. And therefore, we see the situation. We've looked at the numbers. We already took, the grocery rebate, we took action before. But now when we look at the numbers, we're saying kind of enough is enough. And we need to work with them. That's why we said to them, you have to come to Ottawa next week. We have to find meaningful solutions so that Canadians can see that we stabilize prices and we don't see kind of the level of inflation that we've seen in the grocery sector over the last quarters. So I think what we're saying is fairly reasonable. Canadians would expect that. Like I said, we've seen that in other jurisdictions. And we're going to be doing a Canadian solution. And I expect them to work with us because, like I said, millions of their customers expect that.
So what does the Canadian solution look like? Can you quantify what relief would look like for people? Because the grocery chains have already put out a statement, and you saw them when they testified at committee in March, that they say their prices and profits aren't the problem. It's supply chain issues. It's the war in Ukraine. So what does a measure of relief
let's
look
talk
like?
about that. Let's look at that. If it's supply chain, I'm happy to work with them on that. That's what being in solution mode, that's the whole concept of being, is that let's look at these things. If it's the big food processor, I've been talking to colleagues in different jurisdictions. I've been talking to colleagues in the United States. We've been seeing what's going on in France. We have to understand the dynamic of the market. We have a number of experts. I'll be working with Dr. Charlebois, which is going to be with us in that as well. We understand very well the market dynamics. But at the end of the day, what we're saying, everyone will have to play his role. And that's why we want to, we said the CEOs will be with us in Ottawa next week. And that will be forging solutions together. That's what Canadians expect from their government in times like that. And it's very similar to what you see in other jurisdictions where government are saying, you know what, we need to act together. The Canadian way is to say, hey, come on board. We'll be looking at solutions. We'll work together for the benefit of millions of customers of yours that are also watching tonight.
But Minister, is your goal to see food prices go down, stay flat, slow the rate of increase? Like, what should Canadians look for? What's the target?
Well, what we want is to stabilize prices and to tackle price inflation. So let's be clear, because what we've seen is price inflation in the food sector. That's what we want, meaningful action to reduce price inflation and stabilize price of food in Canada.
Okay, one of the other measures announced today, and I know this is technically Chrystia Freeland's remit as the Minister of Finance, but it was the extension of the repayment for the Canadian Emergency Business Account, I think is what CEBA is what the acronym stands for. The repayment period is being extended, but if you take that, you lose the forgivable portion of the loan that a lot of people were counting on, that if you paid back the money, a certain percentage of it, up to 25%, would be forgiven. Why are you not also extending the forgiveness allowance in doing this? The Canadian Federation of Independent Business has already said this isn't good enough.
What I would say, what we heard from Canadians, and I can tell you, I've heard from small businesses across the country, the measures they wanted to see was to extend the deadline. That's what I've heard across Canada. And you know, a responsible government is a government which listens to Canadians. We've been listening all summer. And I can tell you that's what I heard, David. That's what they ask us, and that's what we're delivering for small businesses. They say, please extend the deadline. Times are tough. There's a lot of costs which are going up. Give us a bit more time so we can repay.
But by getting rid of that forgiveness portion now increases the value of the debt, right, for some of these businesses. So why not consider extending that as well?
Listen, we've done, listen, I can tell you, David, what I've heard. People were asking us to extend the deadline, and it's exactly what we've delivered. That was overwhelmingly what we heard from small businesses, was to extend the deadline, and that's what we've done. And I think that's very meaningful for small businesses, because as much as we're talking for inflation and price of about everything going up, that's also affecting small businesses, and I think we've been very responsive to them on that.
Okay. Minister François-Philippe Champagne, always appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you.